Hello and welcome to today's special webinar event, Phish Stories, Episode 2. This is another special webinar in our series where we discuss the latest phishing attacks challenging businesses today. This event is brought to you in partnership with SlashNext. Thank you so much for joining us on this webinar. As you can see with me here on camera, I've got a couple of special guests that I'll be introducing you to in just a moment. Before we do that, just a few things that you should know about the webinar. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as your moderator. We want this to be an educational event. We want to help you to get your questions answered, and we encourage you to use the questions box. It's there in your audience console. I see many of you have already discovered it with hello and good afternoon messages from across the United States and around the world. So thank you so much for those. But we also want to help you solve your challenges around security and phishing and human hacking. So keep those questions coming, and we'll be doing a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the event. We also have a number of resources in the handouts tab. You can request a demo of the SlashNext solution, sign up for a free risk assessment. There's the State of Phishing 2021 report, the Social Engineering podcast, which is our special guest podcast, the Hacking Human conference, and the Human Hacking book. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce you to our expert presenters. Welcome, Mr. Patrick Harr, Chief Executive Officer at SlashNext, and Mr. Chris Hagnagy, founder and CEO of The Social Engineer. Patrick and Chris, thank you so much for being on the event today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
All right, well, just before we kick it off with our first series of panel discussion questions that we'll cover, I should mention that we are running a best question prize on this event today for a $50 Amazon gift card. So keep those questions coming. And then, of course, we also have our Amazon $300 gift card that I'll introduce or announce at the end of the event. And I also want to make sure I call attention to our special guest on today's Phish Stories webinar. Chris, it's really great to have you. You know, last time Patrick and I discussed what's happening in the industry around phishing and how to prevent it. But it's great to have you on the event today. I have down that your title is Chief Human Hacker, that you have a podcast. Tell us the name of the podcast again, the Social Engineering podcast. Is that right?
That is it. Yep, that is 100% the name.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to have to sign up for that podcast myself and learn about, all that's hacking or all that's happening in the world of social engineering. Sounds really cool. And then I know that we have a copy of your book that we'll be giving out today to one lucky attendee on the event. We'll be contacting that prize winner after the event. But before we move on, tell us again about the name of your new book and what's inside.
Sure. So the new book is called Human Hacking: Win Friends, Influence People, and Leave Them Feeling Better for Having Met You. So it's kind of a take on the old 1932 book on winning friends and how to influence people, but brought up to the 2021 new life that we have. It's really how to use communications, as we have so many years as hackers or as social engineers, but now using them not necessarily as a social engineer, but as an everyday person to just get the things you want out of life, but to always do it in a way using empathy and compassion, communicating with people in a way that will leave them feeling better for having interacted with you. And it takes you through a lot of stories of how I've done that in my career and share some of that knowledge and how you can use that in everyday life.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to reading the book myself, and one lucky attendee on the event will be winning the book. If you want to learn more about Chris's book, check out the link. It's there in the handouts tab as well. And then Chris also has an upcoming conference, an online conference on hacking the human. Chris, tell us what we would learn in that conference.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this one. So I made a conference that was something I wanted to go to. So it's not really about security. It's not about being a security industry. This is I gathered people from all different areas of science, like Joe Navarro, Mark Bowden, Ian Rowland, R. Paul Wilson, these people who are specialists in their field. And they are going to come and do training sessions on things like nonverbals, persuasion, deception, facial expressions, rapport building and trust and things like that. So you get to come and take training from some of these amazing names, learning how to communicate better and learning how to use those communications in everyday life. Regardless if you're a security person or a parent, a CEO, whatever your position is, learning how to do that better can help you become a better person.
Excellent. Sounds like a great opportunity. And so I'm really excited about our discussion today. Chris is going to be telling us about, the human side of this phishing attack vector. And Patrick's going to be talking to us about the prevention side, how to prevent these type of attacks and do it as quickly and efficiently as possible, hopefully, before they ever have any kind of impact on the company and the data. So we'll be talking specifically about 0-hour attacks and hacking the human. And the first question on our list is, how has social engineering changed in the past year, and what does it look like today? Chris?
Boy, the last year has changed it a ton. If we just look back, like previous to the year, I mean, social engineering has always been around, right? So ever since humans have been communicating, there have been scams and con men and social engineers. But in the last year, the last 5 years, what we've seen is scammers have started to use horrible events, when the planes hit the towers in 9/11, when the tsunamis hit Japan, when the earthquake was in India or Haiti. All of these events brought out scammers that started fake charities or started gathering money from unsuspecting victims. Now we have a global pandemic in the last 12 months, which made the attack surface for these malicious social engineers the whole globe. And then you mix that with people going to work from home and schooling from home, where a whole family is now at home, and the attack surface has opened up to more phone-based vectors, smishing, which is text message, and of course our big topic of today, which is phishing, has gone through the roof.
Excellent. And then Patrick, why don't you tell us about, what have you seen when it comes to social engineering in the past year, and what are the types of things we could do to try to prevent that?
Yeah, I think he somewhat hit the nail on the head. Last year really was the year of the phish, and specifically year of phish through social channels, whether it be Facebook, whether it be obviously something like Zoom, whether it be, pick your favorite tool that you were communicating on. Couple that with the fact that you had obviously a lot of discussion around COVID. We saw just significant number of COVID-related attacks, whether it be at the start of the pandemic or now in the vaccine era of the pandemic. Each and every one of these bad actors out there, and I should also note there's nation states behind these things as well, because they realize this is an opportunity to attack, really at the heart of what he's focused on, which is attack the human. And the best way to attack humans is through the way they communicate. And so if I can get right inside your LinkedIn Messenger on the business front, or if I can get right inside your Facebook Messenger, couple that with your regular old email that I may send, a particular attack through, we're probably at the most dangerous time that I've personally ever seen. And I've been around the block for a little bit of time now, starting, probably go back in the security space about 30 years now. But we are really at the most dangerous inflection point. And the reason for that is you have such broad amount of raw compute available. You have legitimate infrastructure available to these hackers. You have basically very targeted information I can glean off dark web and open source information. And that's somewhat of a concoction. If you combine all that aspect with a pandemic, you really have a recipe for something that's just not good. And we've, again, seen this directly in our labs. We saw about a 3,000% increase in phishing attacks. And they weren't just, again, inside of email. They were across all these different communication channels.
It's a frightening time. I mean, Patrick, as kind of a follow-up, I'm curious, has the increased adoption of mobile and work from home really also been a factor in this tremendous increase?
Yeah, 100%. Again, we went from everyone is inside the perimeter, inside the office, to everyone's at home. I'm sure, like others, I've got 2 younger kids as well as 2 older kids. My younger one came in and did some schoolwork. Next thing I know, had all these browser aspects pop up, and inside these browser extensions are phishing attacks. And And so I guess the net of this is not only did we have the pandemic, but we had this dramatic shift into remote working, remote learning. And with that, it's not uncommon. Again, in the same 15 minutes, I go from here to this device we're talking on, back to this device for an SMS, and then over across those social channels that I highlighted. And with that, that attack surface is dramatically opened. And because you're not paying attention as much, it's very easy to click on that SMS that came in that said, hey, the Amazon package is now available on your doorstep, or hey, the IRS called and you're being audited. You just don't pay attention as much because you're going in and out in the same device, and or you got to hop over to your kid's school session. And so I think, again, that's why I highlight 2020 really was the year of the Phish, because of the multiple different things that occurred, specifically, again, remote learning, remote working, as well as the pandemic.
Yeah, great points all around. I mean, I've seen just a tremendous increase in mobile alerts and notifications. Every website, school, doctor, dentist, credit card company, they're all using them, and they're very hard to control. There's not as many controls on them as there are around email. So, I mean, let's move on to our next question here, which is, how are cybercriminals specifically taking advantage of users? Chris, what have you seen?
Well, there's a few things. One, and Patrick mentioned it. We're dealing with a time now where, like, let's say mom, dad, and both kids are at home, and they're all trying to find a space in a house that didn't previously have 4 offices to do school and work. So we're sharing a lot of resources. That adds stress to people. Attackers know that when someone's under stress, they're more prone to make a really poor decision. So that's the first thing they're playing on, is that stress level will create an environment where people may not make the right decision when they should. Secondly, is that in addition to being stressed, we're working more than we ever have. Like, we may before have left the office at 5 and went home. Now we say, okay, I'm going to go take a break for dinner. Then I'll just come back and check emails for a few minutes. And before you know it, it's 1 a.m. You don't realize that, oh, wow, I just was sitting here for the last 5 hours, because your office is in your house, or your laptop is by your bed, or wherever it is. So you just end up working more, which means that the attacker before maybe had a 9 to 5 window to get you to click on something. Now they have a 9 to 1 a.m. window. So it's a much larger attack surface for them. And then what Patrick said, I've seen a ton of also the joint attacks of smishing and vishing and phishing being all together. Yeah, we're seeing that a ton, where we're seeing people get text messages that are compromising their phones, phishing emails that look like they're coming from legitimate people to get credentials or passwords or things like that, and even following up with phone calls that have spoofed numbers that look like they're coming from legit sources. The attacks no longer seem to have the element that we used to say, like poor English or bad grammar or bad spelling. Now we're seeing they've used spell check, they've used grammar check, and they look so good that we're having a hard time catching them like we did before.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what have you seen, Patrick?
Yeah, just to build on this, obviously we just talked about the fact that because we're all at home, we're working day in, day out. Just as an aside, I should note, I have some friends up at a big company in Redmond. You can probably guess what that is. They actually had to put some curbs on their developers because they were actually working. They're so productive that they were far ahead of schedule. So think about that just for a moment. That just highlights how productive people are at home. But with that, it also highlights back to this point of this broad attack surface available, because when you're working 14, 16 hours, you get a little tired. I mean, everyone has to have a little sleep out there. And with that, the bombardment, we truly have seen a bombardment of these phishers coming across these different communication channels. It's no longer just an email threat. It's, as we were just highlighting, it's an SMS threat. It is a video, it's a voice threat, but it's also these collaboration tool threats. We heard about being zombied or zoomified, or whatever they call that within Zoom, or you get Zoom bombed. I actually call it zoomified because you somewhat become a little bit of a zombie on Zoom after time. Whether it's there or coming inside a box, Dropbox, even again, for those that have kids or those that play games, you see it in Discord, right? My kid plays all the different games, and there's phishing attacks coming through those gaming channels. So bottom line, what we see fundamentally is a pretty significant shift out there in the market. I alluded to this previously, but if you think about what the attackers have available to them, and I'm not just talking about nation states, but because nation states are very active in phishing. And the reason for that, it's pretty commonly known out there, 95% of all external attacks start with phishing. Why is that? Because it's much easier to hack a human. I'll borrow his terms here for a moment. It's much easier to hack a human than it is to hack some other network, some other defended machine. And so if you think about what these phishers have available to them, they have very low cost compute. Why it's been very advantageous, particularly for startups such as ourselves, with using AWS, Azure, Google, whether GoDaddy. You think about all these legitimate infrastructures out there, and the cost of compute that you have available to it, it's pretty low, and it's very powerful. Second, it's legitimate, meaning it's coming inside. We see attacks actually coming from Google itself, right, or from AWS itself, or from Azure itself, or from GoDaddy itself. So you have legitimate infrastructure. You've got very low cost compute. You have open source AI models. Now, why is that important? If I can launch an attack using artificial intelligence that also takes in behavioral information about you, you now think about that becomes a very targeted attack. So it's no longer this generic, hey, I need money for this particular charity, right? We've seen all those scams. It's actually pointing to you specifically. It's never been pointed out. And it adds some behavioral information about you, whether that was sourced out of LinkedIn, whether that was sourced off of a Facebook channel, or whether that was sourced off the dark web. So now it becomes much more effective. And as we highlighted, these attacks are then launched in an automated fashion. They live for about 24, 48 hours, and then they retire and they start again. But those attacks, once they launch, they're automated. They come through all these different communication channels. And that's why this shift to remote working or remote learning was so powerful for these folks. Because now if I can attack you through SMS, through email, through the gaming channels, through these collaboration channels, I somewhat surround the user, right? So I have an ultimate opportunity to hack the user. And I'd add one other point here. It's no longer for these phishers just about credential stealing. It is about how do I get you to take rogue software? I mentioned the browser extension. Right? My kid did this on my own machine, and behind that was actually some ransomware. And so if you think about what can be injected behind software, you think about these social engineering scams. Everyone probably recalls when Twitter got taken down by the 14-year-old. That was a Bitcoin scam that we discovered back in 2019. So you have these social engineering scams, you have scareware tactics, you've got rogue software, as well as the the traditional credential harvesting, and you effectively again surround the user. It becomes somewhat of a nightmare. So how the heck can you stay ahead of this? I mean, I challenge, and I'm actually show some of the examples for the naked human eye to take a look at some of these pages and say, is this really a phish or not? It's pretty incredible. You factor that in with you being tired, working 14, 16 hours, you really do have a recipe for disaster. And that's why now more than ever, I think you have to be pretty diligent about protecting yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great point. I like the graphic there on the slide, the concept of the user being surrounded. I think that's very true. And they do a great job of creating urgency in scaring us. You know, your credit card has been declined, or your Amazon package had a delivery exception. Click here. So, you know, surrounding the users with scary things and encouraging them to click when they're under stress. Great points all around. So let's talk more in detail about some of these specific evasive threats. Chris, you want to start with this one?
Sure. So, you know, it used to be one of the biggest education things we can tell people is that they look at the URL, hover over it. You're going to see if it's not Amazon.com, it's going to be clear. If it's not Microsoft.com, that's going to be clear. It's going to be something.ru or whatever. Don't click on that. But one of the things we've noticed recently in attacks is they're actually buying domains that look legitimate. So maybe they're buying, you know, shipping-amazon.com. That domain's not available, but let's make believe it was. They find one like it. They buy one that tricks the people enough that they're seeing a domain that they go, wait, that says Amazon in it, so that must be real. That's one of the things we see. In addition to and Patrick alluded to this, was the combination attacks. So you get a phishing email, but it's followed up by a text message or a phone call, and the phone number is spoofed. And all of these things are meant to prove to you that what you're getting is legit and real. These type of attacks are way different than what we were seeing before, where they a lot of times resulted in greed previous, and now they're really basing it on things like fear. Like here in my local area, we had a find out your what position you're in on the waiting list for the COVID vaccine. And now when you see your name in this list of all these names and you're like, 1 millionth, hey, you can bump it up to the top 100 if you want to just pay a fee, right? So how many, to us in this industry, we go obvious scam, but maybe to someone who's, got a sick grandparent or a sick mom or dad or a child that, they're looking at that and going, well, is this worth a couple $100s to jump up to the top 100? I'll take it. I'll do it. And you could see that these type of evasive techniques are becoming more and more aggressive in addition to try to get people's money, identities, credentials, or other type of information that they then use for further attacks. So we're also seeing that it's not just one stage anymore. It's not just let me take your credit card number, then you'll never hear from me again. It's let me start with that, and then I'm going to come back later on for your birthday. Then I'm going to come back for your name. And then by the time it's over, they own your identity. They've ruined your life. It's not just a one-stop shop. I mean, here in my state, they've also done a number of unemployment scams where people, they'll actually troll social media. Someone says, oh, man, I just lost my job. I hate you, COVID. And they'll go and apply for benefits under that person's name. And just say, hey, deposit it in this account. It will be weeks before it's caught. And by then, they've probably gotten 3-4 different payments. They've made a few $100s, few $1,000s, whatever it is off of that person before it gets stopped. The account is closed. The money's not recovered. It's these type of things that we're seeing more and more and more of that's making it much more difficult to catch these attackers.
Scary times, how they're preying on the most vulnerable of the population out there. So Patrick, I know you've got some slides here talking about some specific examples of evasive threats. Tell us about that.
Yeah, actually, if you just want to move forward here, just a few commentary points. Obviously, this is coming from the attack is coming on the consumer front, but it's also coming on the business front. It's somewhat well known as an example. Toyota lost $35 million in financial fraud through phishing. We've seen that in multiple different businesses. So this isn't just the $100 or $200 aspect. This can be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And this is the reason why, particularly this last year, the FBI has put out pretty significant warnings to be very vigilant about what's going on. Now, why do you, again, we've talked a little bit about why you need to be more vigilant today than before. And this is somewhat a perfect example of this. Obviously, as I was alluding to before, last year and particularly right now, we're seeing very strong related COVID or COVID-related scams. He just mentioned a vaccine, like jump up to the front of the line. But in this particular case, we're actually seeing nation states. I won't mention them who they are, but some nation states are actually launching very strong evasive phishing attacks to lab technicians in some of the leading providers or leading manufacturers of these COVID vaccines. And the intent here is obviously to steal the IP around those vaccines. And so they're bombarding these different lab technicians and those that surround the lab technicians, whether they be upfront suppliers or downstream customers or distributors. And so this particular attack was actually, again, generated in as you see here in December, and it was spawned over 80 specific targeted spear phishing attacks hosted in legitimate infrastructure. I mentioned this just before, and he was just alluding to this. It's no longer good enough, and all the defenses I will tell you out there were somewhat tuned to what I would characterize as a static reputation. So if I trusted Google.com, right, I'm going to trust that to get through my defense. Part of the reason why we call it SlashNext, there's obviously a Linux heritage here, SlashNext on directory. But if you think about it in a domain characteristic basis, right, /next, you keep going /// into that google.com nested aspect. I mentioned before in Google itself, GCP itself, we saw about 50,000 hosted phishing attacks. And so they're embedding themselves inside these legitimate infrastructure, because I can go into the app source, or I can go into these different web services, launch this attack. So it looks like it's coming from legitimate infrastructure. In this case, it absolutely did. And they spawned it across multiple different legitimate infrastructures. And if you go to the next slide, at the core, they're all basic, simple. Right? I launched from these legitimate hosted infrastructures, targeting these lab technicians and those associated with them, not just the CFO, which is obviously a common way if I want to steal money. In this case, it was about stealing IP, and they were all O365 logins, fake login scams, right? So this is an attempt to get credentials. Once I'm in there, obviously I want to do data exfiltration. So while it's core, they use the legitimate infrastructure. There's more trusted aspect to that. They spawn it, as I mentioned, very automated fashion. And it comes very, very quickly. And to this point, well, again, these are fake login pages. It's very hard to tell is this real O365 or not. Last Phish story, I actually showed a two-factor authentication attack. That was an evasive technique where they'd gotten beyond, even though you may use two-factor authentication, they were still able to phish. And so really, not only are they coming, as I highlighted, very quickly, very right, almost huge, this huge sheer numbers. They're very targeted, and they're living very quickly, right? They can spawn these things 24 hours. And so the point here, if you go to the next slide, what's very interesting, if you don't catch these attacks at time of creation, then you may never see it again. Or, as I also highlighted, a lot of the tools that people use to employ to defend against these were based off that static reputation, human forensics approach. They still have not detected that particular COVID-related attack, right? This is Virus Total. It's somewhat of a Bible. If you look at all across the industry of all the different tools in, for phishing-related or virus-related attacks, you'll see here no one's detected that particular attack. And that's something, again, we saw in December, and we detect. Our whole value is how do we detect this at not just when they park the page, but when they actually go live, generate traffic. And at that point, there's preemptive things that we do. We want to not only detect that, but block it. So it is, again, it's a scary scenario out there, but there's things obviously that you can do that we believe you can do to protect yourself against these type of attacks.
Excellent. And then
this is
what about the mobile?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think Chris was just highlighting this a little bit ago, and I'm sure he can add even some more stories. Let's call them these multi-stage attacks, or multi-vector, multi-communication attacks. They're also scary. In this particular case, I mentioned before, everyone probably got that Amazon package delivery, or U.S. Postal Service or FedEx package delivery. You need to complete this form because we couldn't deliver it. There's a lot of people that fell for that. I mentioned the IRS scam calls, right? Call this number, you're being audited. I'm sure everyone's gotten those. And what you'll see in that particular case, there's no link. It's called this 800 number, and it's got a natural language text message. So this is just another example, or specific examples of what we would call smishing, both link-based. Again, where I'm trying to get you to go to a particular website or a link and fill out your information, or I'm trying to get you to call. So it's very important that, because this is probably, interestingly enough, the most unprotected attack surface there is for phishing. It's very well isolated, and Apple does a phenomenal job of securing vulnerabilities, et cetera, and backdoor channels inside the applications. But think about the one thing that they can attack is that human, right? That human attack surface. And that's very easy to do. SMS is now more trusted than email. So it's important, again, if you look at these attacks, and we're seeing specifically here, we saw about 300% increase in the last quarter of smishing related attacks. Again, both natural language as well as these link-based attacks. It is something important to be conscious of, particularly when you're going in and out of in your work life, personal life, and you may not pay attention. You may click on something or act on something. So again, be cautious of this.
Great point. Chris, you want to chime in a little bit on mobile smishing and the multiple vector attacks?
Yeah, so now, of course, especially as everyone's working from home, so we're seeing some of the rules that may have existed that were tighter before be more loose. Like people can check their work resources from their mobile device, check their email, maybe log into certain servers or things like that. That of course makes mobile a much hotter target for any type of attacker, because if they can gain access to your mobile device, and they may gain access to things like your one-time passwords that come in through that, other applications or things of that nature. So and we do it a lot on our phones. I mean, no one raised their hands, but how many of you are checking your bank on your phones, have banking apps on your phones, or pay your credit card bills on your phones, transfer money through Venmo or Zelle or something else on your phones, social media on your phones. If we think about the amount of things that we're doing on our phones, that makes our mobile device like an attacker's dream. And if they can gain access to that or take control of it, they now take control or gain access to all of those items. So it is very attractive for an attacker to look at our mobile devices and to think about what they can gain from gaining access to it. With that, we are seeing them as used as multi-vector attacks, where maybe we had one company, a client of ours, that had an attack where someone sent a phishing email and said that, oh, the attachment is passworded. Somebody will call you to exchange the password because it was a secure document. So they get a call on the phone, and then they say, we need to send you a one-time password to your mobile. What's your number? They literally just text them the password that they set for the document, making it seem all legit. The person feels it's legit, so they open the document, which is a zip file which has malware-laden EXEs in it, right? So, we're looking at a situation where these attackers very intelligently use something that we're familiar to doing now, which is getting passwords through either text or an authenticator app to log into something, and using that process to get someone to follow along and do something they shouldn't do. I don't think we're going to see that go away anytime soon. The more vectors that they can use in one, the more proof that they give our brains that it's legit, and the easier we fall for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, you all are doing a great job convincing me here that as an end user, we are surrounded, just like that graphic we came back to, with multiple vectors. And so, I mean, that really now brings us to the next step of this, which is, what can we do to try to prevent these types of things? Chris, I'll start off with you.
Yeah, so there's really only two things, and I'll cover one because that's my experience. So it's either find tools that work, or educate, or not. I shouldn't say or. They should be both done in conjunction. Find tools that work and educate. And my experience comes with the education, so I'll speak on that. Is teaching people how to recognize phish is more than just sending templated phish from a SaaS out there. It's no different than saying, you can lose weight and get in shape by just opening up MyFitnessPal, right? That will help you, won't it? Well, yeah, it's a tool. It will help. But if you have someone who teaches you how to use it properly, now you can use that education right. So education needs to change with the times. It needs to involve multi-vector attacks that we're seeing now. It needs to involve real-world things, not using attacks that are still the 419 scams about Nigerian money or something like that. They need to involve things that we're seeing in the market. Yet with doing that, not losing that edge that we're not supposed to be the bad guys. We hear horrific stories. Companies who announce one day that there's no employee bonuses and then use employee bonuses as a phish. That's horrific. What a terrible way to teach your employees by dangling in front of them the very thing they need to live, which is money. So learning how to balance the fact that you're a company that needs to take care of your employees with the right type of education is a balancing act. And if you can find that balance and then blend that with the tools that I'm sure Patrick will cover, you may have a wonderful approach to not being the low-hanging fruit, which is what we all want, right? Because we used to say in this industry, if you get attacked. I think now we've all changed our methodology to when. And I'd like the when for me to be really, really, really far in the future and keep pushing that line. And that's only going to happen if I can keep on the higher end of the education and tool spectrum. So I'm constantly using the newest, latest, and greatest.
Great advice. And Patrick, what should companies be doing out there to mitigate these types of attacks?
Yeah, let me just build on this. Let me actually first say there's nothing 100% foolproof, period. Anyone that tells you that is you probably got some land I could sell you. And I not only say that, I take I've always been in the opinion, I've been in the proxy space, been risk compliance space, single sign-on, and now phishing. And any good security defense is a multi-layered approach, right? And it first starts, I think, with an assessment. You want to assess your state. And that's perhaps even more important today than ever before, because we shifted dramatically, as we highlighted in 2020, from everyone was really inside the perimeter to now everyone's outside the perimeter and they're everywhere. So really assess where you are, particularly from a phishing standpoint, but do that across the board as a security practice, right? Figure out where your vulnerabilities are, figure out what your password protection schemes are, obviously to protect your different assets, but also really figure out where what currently sits in your existing environments for phishing. So I'd say that's point one. Second, train. I'll never give up on the fact that you want to train, but it is how you train and not just have the tool. I think that's a great point. It's not like you just take a magic vitamin because you bought the vitamin and you're all of a sudden you've lost the weight. I think training is a very important and effective aspect to a phishing defense. Now, I'll highlight one related thing to that in just a moment, because even in training, we always see effectively in our research here, we always see the same click happy users, despite the fact that they've taken the training and you've done multiple ways to try to train them. It's the same people that keep clicking. I don't know why. Perhaps they just not paying attention, or they just don't want to because it's a CBT based training and they're like, let's keep going. And then they're done. And then the next quarter comes around and they fall for the same tactics. I think, as he was highlighting, it's not just the tool; it's about how you implement that, how you run some of the creative without upsetting some of those users. That was a little bit interesting on the bonus. The final piece, and I said this at the last Phish Stories, and I'll continue to say this now. I'm a fundamental believer that you have to fight machines with machines, meaning, as I noted before, these bad actors are using artificial intelligence to spawn and create and generate these real-time attacks on you across these different communication channels. And so that means you have to take a different approach. It's not uncommon when we go into customers and they have a proxy solution, they have a firewall solution, they have a secure email solution, they have an endpoint solution. In certain cases, they may have a mobile threat detection solution. Each and every one of those solutions were built with a first generation detection approach to phishing. And what I mean by that, they're looking at static reputations. Whereas in our case, right, we were fundamental believers in AI. You fight machines with machines. Our genesis came out of FireEye and creating the sandbox for malware, then applying AI later on to look not only intent, but how do you prevent these things. The same approach is what we're taking here with phishing, where we look upstream all the internet traffic out there, and we effectively cook these URLs in virtual browsers. And in that virtual browser, there's some unique things that we can do when we look at a canvas of a particular page. So think about it again for a moment. If I'm on this mobile device, it's much smaller. I can't even tell if the logo is different, or I can't tell if the login screen slightly different. So we apply computer vision to that page. We look at logo offsets. So Wells Fargo customers, Chase customers, right? We have the certified logo effectively. We look at that. We look at color schemes. We look at other aspects. We look at natural language on that page, slight different dialect aspects that may come from China versus Russia versus North Korea versus obviously here in the States. And then finally, we look at behavioral analysis and behavioral intent, including the HTML code behind. All that's done, so we make a determination, is this a live phishing attack? And as I also noted, we will look at preemptive techniques. There's some things I won't get into, but suffice it to say, when you squat on legitimate infrastructure, it's coming from a known IP. There's evasive techniques these folks will use to go through different ways to get to you. So we look at residential proxies and et cetera. But as soon as that page not only goes live, but when it actually starts generating traffic, we issue a block command. Now, why do I go through this? Because again, I go back to this point. I believe you have to take a multi-layered defense approach. Second, I believe you have to fight machines with machines. You need to make it look like you've got an army of folks, hundreds of thousands of data scientists continually looking at this stuff through this machine-based approach versus the individual human forensics that a lot of those folks rely on today. Because it is such a multifaceted, multi-vector, multi-communication channel problem, the only way you can stay ahead of the curve is use that. And the final thing I would note, I believe that phishing is becoming much more, again, it's attacking the human, and it's attacking the human in a very targeted way on the mobile device we talked about or the other endpoints it use. So it's very much becoming much more of an endpoint problem, because there are specific things I can go through, which I won't bore people with detail, but suffice it to say, again, there's things that we can never even see out in the wild. It may only come to you on this particular device with a very targeted information they gleaned from the dark web or some other behavioral aspect of LinkedIn, et cetera. So it's only come here. And the only way we know actually how to attack these things, not only through our global detection engine, but on device machine learning. So we respect the hell out of privacy and we respect the hell out of performance. So on this device, without proxying, you want to actually be able to read that smishing message so you can determine, is it a call scam? Is it this IRS thing? It's not actually valid, or is it the bank? It's impossible. It's impersonating the bank. How do you detect that? You factor that in with this very massive trend towards end-to-end encryption, TLS 1.3. There's the only way you're going to be able to detect some and block some of these phishing attacks is actually on this device itself. So I would also encourage everyone, it doesn't have to be us, but encourage folks to take a multi-layered defense approach, obviously train, assess, and then make sure at its core, at its cornerstone there, you're using AI to actually solve this problem.
Excellent advice. I love that. Fighting machines with machines, especially for these more complex multi-vector attacks. Let's see, we're starting to run out of time and get into our Q&A session here. I know we have some resources from socialengineer.org. Chris, do you want to talk about those for a moment?
Sure. So, you were nice enough to mention in the beginning our podcast, which you can find on the website social-engineer.org. There's also a framework there that can help people understand some of the topics that we spoke about today. The Human Hacking Conference is all about really using the skills of communications in a more holistic way, not necessarily as an attacker. And that's really the basis of that new book, so the human hacking book that we have there. And all of these things came from really studying these type of attacks, but then also learning how we can use the same type of skill set each and every day, and just trying to understand not only the attacker mindset, but understand how we can use this in everyday communications to just better ourselves, the companies that we work with, our families, and things like that, to keep us safe and secure from these type of malicious actors.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, we've got your book here that we're giving away as our one of our drawings for today. So we'll be announcing the winner of that lucky winner, or that the winner of the book here in just a moment. Before we go into that, I want to talk for a moment here about how SlashNext can help to mitigate these types of attacks, because there's got to be more, as Patrick said, than just user education. It's just not cutting it. Patrick, what does SlashNext do? I know you talked about it a little bit, but you want to go into some more details?
Yeah, let me just quickly, as I said, assess, train, protect. Right, I kind of look at it in those three steps. I'd encourage each and every one of you out there to. We have a free assessment. It's much like doing a pen test or a vulnerability assessment. It's very lightweight, and I think if you just turn the slide, it's for those O365 users out there. Plug right into the Graph API. And then we'll run a scan against the emails, and we'll tell you what lies in wait, right? What phishing attacks are sitting inside your email. There's a second aspect. You can upload your proxy logs or your open DNS logs or your firewall logs. This is a little trickier because everyone's outside the perimeter, and that's why more of that secure gateway or secure web gateway or the proxy side or the open DNS side is probably more valuable. But if you upload that, it will not only tell you what's inside your email, but will actually tell you who actively participated in phishing attacks over the last 60, 90 days. And it's extremely eye-opening, despite the fact that I would say 95+% of these companies implement phishing-based training. We see on average between 20 and 30% of folks that participated in some form of attack over the last 90 days. So it's fairly eye-opening. Take that as a free resource. I'm not trying to push anything because I think knowing where you sit is half the battle, right? Once you know where you sit, you can actually put implementation plans in place. The second piece I did mention, again, I'm a big fan of training, and I think you have to, that's a good aspect. And obviously bring someone, I got to get one of your titles, by the way. I love the title because I think it's kind of in concert working with experts that can help you implement the training program and drive that. But second to that, we fundamentally believe that you want to reinforce live training as well. So if you implement our service, it is a kind of a set and forget service that protects you on the mobile side. It protects you on PCs and Macs. We have a network-based protection as well. But if you implement that, we'll do live reinforced training. So at the point of click, if someone happened to fall for an SMS scam, with point of click, we'll pop up a screen and we'll say, hey, someone's attempting to steal your credentials. We'll give you a little education. We're trying to reinforce the behavior to somewhat root the phish out. Again, nothing's foolproof. Our detection engine is 99.1%. We implemented machine learning on this device and on PCs and Macs and web browser extensions to catch that 0.9% of targeted spear phishes, where we actually do NLP on device and computer vision on device. So I would say, again, take advantage of this assessment. It's very, very simple. Takes 10 minutes. You'll get results in an hour. It's free. And I don't say that, again, to try to bring you into the fold. I am a big fan, as I've said this over and over again, really understand where you sit. And that's the reason why I pushed hard when I joined the company to get this free assessment. So you have that opportunity to take advantage of it and understand where you sit. And then you can implement your security posture or post that aspect.
Excellent. And I should point out to everyone out there in the audience, in the handouts tab, you'll find a link to the free risk assessment that you see there in the slides window. Also to request a demo of the SlashNext solution. And we'll just leave this up here for a few minutes while we take questions from the audience. First question that came in, this one's from Mike. He's asking, or he says, so we're pretty good at catching emails, phishing emails, but the question is there any way to reduce them or get rid of them in the first place? Patrick, I'll start with you, I guess.
Yeah, so again, I just mentioned the assessment. Let me just say, so there's another, we commissioned a third-party study through Tolly Group, and they kind of ran side-by-side comparisons against Mimecast, Proofpoint, as well as Microsoft E5, E3, which is actually ATP Defender. In that context, Microsoft caught 30% of the phishing attacks. Proofpoint is next, and then Mimecast was the kind of the top of those three. But even in those cases, they caught it. The worst case was 30, a little north of 30%. The other one's 50%. And Whereas again, in our case, we caught 98.1%, and had they clicked 10 minutes later, we actually caught 100%. But for truth in advertising, that study was done. So the reason why I point this out, 99% of tools out there are oriented in this static reputation approach, meaning they're going to let a lot of stuff through. So even though people think they're defended, even in email, use that assessment just to show exactly what's sitting in line and wait, because it is eye-opening. Second, when you do find those things, you now have the ability to take action. I can respond to those. I can issue commands to clean those particular phishes before they actually get down to the users. So I would say that's what I would suggest. One, assess, understand where they are. Two, take action against those phishing attacks so you can remove them from the email box. Third, and I just want to reiterate, phishing is not just an email problem. If I think both of us leave you with nothing else today, phishing is dramatically expanded to all these other communication channels. Why is that? Because we as human are the lowest common denominator. We're the weakest link in security. And they know if they can surround you through all these different communication channels, then they have an opportunity to do some damage. So my final thing I would suggest, you need to protect yourself across those communication channels, not just email.
Great advice. Chris, I'm not sure if you want to chime in on that one. Any suggestions, or should we move on?
No, I think Patrick covered it great.
Okay. Next question comes from Gijo, I think is how you pronounce it. He says, when the attacker out there has more funding, knowledge, and resources than we do in the enterprise, what stealth strategies can we take to counter the attack? Any suggestions for him, Chris?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that there's any stealth. I would kind of just reiterate what Patrick said a few minutes ago, which is this holistic approach between training and the proper tool usage, making yourself not the low-hanging fruit, right? No one here will ever say you can be hacker-proof if you do these things. But if you do these things, you can make yourself less susceptible to these attacks than, let's say, the average company that's not doing these things. So if you use tools like SlashNext and you use proper education and training, then you have a better chance at fighting off malicious phishing attacks in whatever form they come in. And maybe last I'll say is one thing that a lot of organizations struggle with is a proper reporting agency. So you want your people to not click the phishing emails and to not interact with them, but you need to give them a place where they can report these things without fear of retribution. So if you can start a reporting agency that snaps into action, not just an email box where they sit and wait until they die, they need to go in and get handled. That lets the company know that you're taking it seriously, and then you'll see that affect the way the employees view these attacks. So I would say that would be my advice on that question.
Yeah, that's great advice. Don't make yourself the low-hanging fruit. I mean, just like any security solution, the burglar is going to hit the house without the video cameras. So having video cameras, it doesn't prevent your house 100% from being burglarized, but it makes you not the low-hanging fruit. So great point. This question's from Doug, and Patrick, maybe you can answer this. Is there any way to mitigate phishing attacks from web browser extensions?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we call our service a total phishing protection service. And what I mean by that is we cover the mobile channels, any app, any communication channel on the mobile phone. We have a lightweight app that sits here. We'll look at all the traffic, any of the clicks. I highlighted what we do with SMS. We stop those smishing-based attacks, not only link, but natural language. For PCs and Macs, we actually plug in right at the browser. All the browsers out there. It can be deployed through a mobile device manager or endpoint management service like Intune. And within that context, we are continually looking not only for these different communication channels and how you come through, but second, the different payload types. And one of those key payload types for phishing is this rogue browser or rogue software, specifically like a rogue browser extension. There's a reason why I mentioned how we highlighted back to Google a lot of phishing attacks that were being effectively hosted. Part of those were the browser extensions. And we actually did one of those phishing assessments for a customer who's, again, now a customer. And we showed through their logs, there was live phishing attempts through their browser extensions. And behind those browser extensions that was done through Chrome, they were infecting with two aspects. One was a malware infection. The second was a ransomware infection. Those are the type of things that we detect and block. So had they had us in place, that would not have been done, because we would have blocked that rogue browser software extension from activating, right? From clicking on anything and anything behind it, you would have been protected. So I think, again, you have to take a total protection defense here. And that includes looking across these channels and looking across these payload types, as well as the different devices that you're accessing it from. And that's what our service is designed and tuned to do.
Excellent. Excellent. And Chris, this question is from Chris out there in the audience, who's asking if you have any tips on getting leadership to buy into security as a priority.
That is a real hard one. That's a great question that we deal with all the time as a service provider for clients. That we'll have some guy in IT or security who reaches out to us, and then it's the battle to get someone in the C-level to sign off on it. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't have a great solution, because it's a mindset. And if your C-level doesn't have the mindset of wanting to take security seriously, you can pull up all the scary stats. I know some people will say that, show them stories, do all that kind of stuff. That doesn't tend to work in my experience. What may work, here's one thing I've seen work sometimes, is showing them ROI. Saying, look, I'd like to try this program that does this, here's the cost, and here's how long it should take us to see these effects, which will mean X. If someone is not caring about security, and you show them all the scary stories from the news, they're going to be like, well, that's not us, that's them. They're just stupid. We're not that way. But if you show them ROI, they may bite on it. And I say may, because it really is a mindset. You have to have a top level, a management tier that sees the value in it. Now, sometimes they see value, but what they don't see is how to do it. So they're given too many options. You go type in phishing vendors in Google, and you're going to have an endless stream of pages that you can go through for every SaaS and service provider out there that wants to sell you a phishing solution. So how does Joe's CEO know which one to choose when he's given 500 options? So if you're in that position, my advice would be for you to present the least amount of options necessary to help him or her make the best choice, which means you have to do all the research up front. And that works at times, but I could probably give more advice if I had specifics, but that's the most general advice I can probably give.
Okay, I think that's excellent advice. Well, I'm afraid we're running out of time here in our webinar. Before we go, I want to make sure I remind everyone again about the links there in the handouts to request a demo of the SlashNext solution, the free risk assessment that we talked about. It seems like the easiest way to get started to improve your security stance. It's free. Why not try it? Learn more about the SlashNext solution, how it can help you. There's also the state of phishing report in there. It might help you to justify security, solutions to the executives. And then there's a ton of resources there from our security expert, Chris, the social engineering podcast link, Hacking the Human Conference, and Chris's new book, The Human Hacking Book. So make sure that you check all of those out. And with that, it's time for our book giveaway. Chris's new book, we have a copy here. It's going out to Michael Moreno from Utah. Congratulations to Michael Moreno. We'll reach out to you with your book. And then we have our Amazon $300 gift card going to Keisha Harris from Maryland. Congratulations to Keisha from Maryland. And of course, we'll reach out to our Best Question Prize winner after the event. Don't forget to sign up for the SlashNext Phishing Risk Assessment there in the Handouts tab. Patrick, it's been great having you on. And Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was nice seeing you all.
Yep. Good seeing you. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us today. Hope that you learned a lot and have a great day. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.